Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, seriously, being lectured on abusive process by the National Party. Seriously. When we're here under urgency, forcing this stuff through, when we've disbanded entire democratically elected councils under urgency with National, and Michael Woodhouse has the audacity to stand up in this House and say that the Labor government abused process. What was that? Oh, it was an audition for a minister's job. Look how he feigns that that's not what it was. It's not that at all. How could you say that? But secretly, he's really pleased that Trevor just said that. Secretly, he's right chuffed. He's going to go back to his office with a big smile on his face. Trevor's endorsed me in the House. Mr. Speaker, I think the speeches by the National and ACT Party members in this part of the debate have just shown how out of touch they are with reality. Out of touch, because they said this is about choice. This is about employees being able to choose to cash in a week's annual leave. And the fact that Mr Henare, worst union organiser in the history of the universe, worst ever, Trojan horse, put in to bring down the union movement. Fortunately, he failed. The thing that Mr Henare doesn't understand is that when you are living on the breadline, when you cannot pay your bills, when you haven't had a pay increase, when the National Government promised not to increase GST before the election and then increase GST after the election, when all your costs have gone up, when your rent has gone up, when you have no money to feed and clothe your kids, Mr Henare says that those people are in a position to choose to cash in a week's leave. I suggest to Mr Henare that they'd probably like to keep their annual leave and be able to afford to pay the bills and have a proper wage increase, be able to afford to pay the bills without having to give up time with their family. It's not choice. It's like saying that a family chooses not to pay their rent and get evicted, that's their choice, that they choose not to be able to afford to send their kids on a school trip, that they choose not to be able to afford to buy their kids clothes. That's exactly the same. Oh, Mr Simon Bridges says they do. Mr Bridges says they do. Families are choosing not to pay their rent because he belongs to a government that is so out of touch, that they've seen the cost of living spiral upwards, wages stall, rent spiral upwards. They increased GST, made it worse for those families, and Mr Bridges says they're choosing not to feed and clothe their kids and choosing not to pay their rent. That is offensive, and that sums up this National Party. Because this isn't about choice. People are being forced into doing this because they are so desperate for money to bridge the gap at the moment that they're having to cash in a week's leave. And it comes back to what my colleagues have been saying. Why do we have annual leave? Do we just have it because we think it's a nice thing? We have it because we know it improves productivity when workers are rested, when they feel that they have an adequate balance between time at home with their family and time at work. A worker who is stressed about what's happening to their kids at home unattended is not going to be as productive as a worker on a day when they, maybe something's happened and there's no parent at home and they would rather be there. It's there to make sure that workers are more productive and that they get time with their families. And I think that it's very telling that the National Party and the ACT Party see annual leave only in terms of the dollar cost. They don't see it in terms of the value it has for families. They don't see it in terms of the benefits for families to be able to have mum and dad at home 4 weeks of the year, to be able to go on holidays together, spend time together as a family. They only see the bottom line dollar cost of that. And that is very telling about this National and ACT government, Mr Speaker. And this from a party that at the last election kept talking about supporting families, being family friendly. Well, they have deserted hard-working New Zealand families who are not who are not able to pay their bills currently, who are struggling to get by, and their answer is not let's make sure that every New Zealander has a living wage that can cover their costs. It's not let's make sure that the cost of living doesn't spiral out of control to the point where families struggle to pay rent to put food on the table. Their answer is put them in a position where they have no other option but to cash in a week's leave and then call it choice. It's not choice. And I think particularly the acting member needs to understand that. You're in a desperate situation. It's not choice. When there is no other option other than being evicted or not feeding your family, it's not choice. And all the rhetoric in the world from the ivory towers inhabited by the ACT Party members and ACT Party supporters will not change the fact that for families on the ground, it's not choice. They don't think it's a choice. Of course, the ACT member and the National members think they know better. I suggest she goes and talks to some of these families who are struggling at the moment, rather than just piously coming into this House and telling them what they should think and how they should feel and saying, isn't this a great day for choice and freedom? Because despite the fact that you can't pay the bills, and despite the fact that you'd love to be able to spend that extra week with your family, you're not going to be able to, and we're not going to actually fix any of the actual issues regarding your family. And I think, Mr. Speaker, that nowhere is the ideological bent of this bill more obvious than when it comes to the issues around sick leave. Because, as colleagues have pointed out time and time again, if an employer currently believes that someone is abusing sick leave provisions, then they can address it. They can do something about it and they can ask for a medical certificate. But to say that anyone who's going to be away is going to have to go to the doctor and get a medical certificate, even if it's for the flu or a cold, which, as we know, doctors often say, stay at home, go to bed, get lots of fluid, don't come into the doctor's surgery, because there's nothing we can actually do for a viral infection. The National Party and the ACT Party say, no, in fact, you should have to go and get a doctor's certificate, or you should come into work and make everyone else sick. That's a really good idea, because we're so ideologically bent against employees, and Heather Roy, I can't remember if it was Heather Roy or Tau Henare who said, well, Labour thinks that Labour, they look the same. They are. I know, it's very difficult to tell them apart. I know. You can only tell them apart when they're together. That's the problem. She said that Labour thinks that all employers are bad and all employees are good. And the fact is that we don't. We understand that employment law is a balance and it needs to address right across the spectrum. Now, the National Party just thinks that every single employee who takes a sick day must be rorting it. So we need to make all of them go to a doctor and get a medical certificate. They're all shirkers, that's right. Despite the fact that currently, if an employee has reason to believe that someone, like for example, someone keeps taking Mondays or Fridays off, or whenever there's a really nice day, they're always taking the day off, or as my colleague Carol Beaumont mentions, they're seen on TV at the Rugby Sevens, then of course that an employer should be able to ask for a sick leave certificate. Helen did do that to Trevor quite a lot, and I can tell you that the law worked just fine. But to say that every employee who gets sick is going to have to go and get a medical certificate, regardless, put aside the fact that it's totally impractical. I mean, the GPs don't want it because they don't want to have to be seeing people that they don't need to be seeing. In fact, you wouldn't be able to do it. And what happens in that respect? If an employee can't get an appointment, what happens if they get penalised for the fact that the National Party have come up with such a ridiculously unworkable piece of legislation? And I didn't just say that, it was also Treasury, MED and the Regulatory Impact Statement that said it was unworkable. Then suddenly they're going to be penalised for something that's outside of their control. And I want to refer to the 2009 National Employers' Wage and Salary Survey, because let's put some facts on the table about sick leave. They found that the average number of sick days that New Zealanders took was 4.6 days, which is actually far lower than everywhere else in the world. So where's the mischief that we're trying to fix with this? Because as we found out, none of the government departments collect stats on this, so this can't be based on any kind of evidence. This is just ideological nonsense. And then research conducted by the Southern Cross Healthcare found that the majority of the cost incurred by employers for sick workers was not from sick leave, but was from the lost productivity of employees who still go to work when they're sick. That is the big issue. That is the issue that if you wanted to really try and address productivity would have some impact. That workers are going to work when they're sick, they're less productive, they're making other people sick. That is an issue that could be dealt with. The issue of employees taking sick days has no impact on this. And if the government was serious about productivity, that would be the issue that they would address.
Dr.